Chapter 1396. Looking at the miraculous scene in the depths of his heart that represented almost all of his power, Noah focused his attention on the stone plate. At this time, the stone plate was in a gray state. It was like a skill that had not been activated in the game. There was no sign of it being active. As expected, I still need to adapt? Every time he arrived in a world, Noah's authority needed to adapt to the world. It would take a month before he could use it without restraint. However, Gaia had told Alea that this adaptation was mainly because the authority's power had the possibility of affecting the world itself. It did not belong to this world, so it needed to adapt. However, Noah's authority was the power obtained from this world, so there should be no need for him to adapt. Unfortunately, Noah's 10 incarnations authority not only had Welaslana's and Mercator's power, but also his own power. In addition, Noah's powerful vitality had completely absorbed the authority and turned it into his own power, removing all the restrictions that the authority should have. Therefore, after arriving in this world, he still needed to adapt. Of course, because this world already had a power called authority, Noah did not need as long as a month to adapt to the authority in this world. I need 7 days to adapt? Noah withdrew his consciousness from the depths of his body and turned to look at the energy source that was like a black hole. Looks like I need to use the power of an item to recover. After saying that, Noah's mind moved and the energy in the energy source in his body was converted into mana. Then Noah opened his eyes and used a trace of mana to open the gate of Babylon. Wong! Following the sound of space trembling, a golden ripple appeared on top of Noah's palm and spat out a gorgeous scabbard. Holding the scabbard, Noah sighed. Luckily, in the battle with the lizard, I did not use Avalon. The relic named Avalon not only had an extremely powerful healing ability, but it also had the powerful function of preventing the user from being drained by external forces. However, in terms of healing, Noah had the Spirit Avatar. In terms of defense, Noah also had the Dragon Emperor Avatar. Therefore, during the battle with the three-headed dragon, Noah did not use Avalon. Furthermore, in the battle against the three-headed dragon, Noah also had to use his full power, using his trump card to convert all the energy in his energy source into divine power, which was the most suitable power to unleash his authority. Although the energy in Noah's energy source was endless, its output was limited. There was no extra space for him to use his magic and activate his relic's power. If it was a noble relic like the Excalibur that only required a certain amount of magic to release it, then it would be fine. However, a noble phantasm like Avalon, which required a continuous supply of magic in order to maintain its liberated state, was a different matter altogether. Considering that he had the Dragon Emperor and the Spirit for defense and healing, Noah did not use Avalon. Now that he thought about it carefully, this decision was really the right one. After all, the three-headed dragon's Asvida's another cosmology was able to imitate the cosmology of objects other than itself, thereby obtaining all of the other party's properties. At that time, if Noah had used Avalon, a noble relic with a Celtic mythological cosmology, causing the three-headed dragon to obtain the defensive and healing abilities of Avalon, then it would have been really troublesome. Moreover, the three-headed dragon could also use the power of another cosmology to use the target's cosmology as a mirror to offset the other party's power. As long as he wanted to, he could erase the power of Avalon at any time, causing Noah to lose more than he gained, right? That another cosmology is really against the rules. With such a sigh, Noah infused magic into the scabbard in his hand, causing a bright golden light to bloom from the scabbard and envelop his whole body. He closed his eyes and began to recover. In fact, Noah, who was thinking this, did not think that his another cosmology was not against the rules. The simulated star Atlas, another cosmology, which was called the illusory star Taisui, could ignore the difference in strength and unconditionally seal the two strongest species, the innate gods and the star spirits of the stars. Although there were restrictions in using it and it could only be used against gods and stars, as long as it was against these two races, even if there were a double-digit number of them, they would not be able to defeat Noah. Among them, there was the White Yaksha, who had sovereignty over 14 suns and was known as the strongest star spirit. Unless the White Yaksha also had the simulated star Atlas, another cosmology. Otherwise, against Noah's another cosmology, the White Night King who had once wreaked havoc in an area could only nurse a grievance, right? He did not know if he had considered that if he made Noah wait too long, it might also make the king angry. About 15 minutes later, Wanli Guyoli walked in with a tray full of dishes, looking nervous. Plates of fragrant dishes were placed neatly on the side of the bed. At this time Noah was holding a bowl of rice, picking up a mouthful of food, and tasting it slightly. Looking at Noah's appearance as he tasted the dishes, Wanli Guyoli's pretty face could not help but show a trace of nervousness. Clearly aware of Wanli Guyoli's nervousness, Noah was more or less amused in his heart. However, his impression of Wanli Guyoli improved a lot. Although he did not know what was going on, Wanli Guyoli seemed to have been trying her best to avoid provoking Noah's disgust. Under such circumstances, if Noah asked for a good meal, then who would want to find a famous chef or a hotel to make a table of luxurious dishes? However, this girl did not do so, but faithfully made this table of dishes with her own strength. Obviously, Wanli Guyoli did not have as many playful hearts as the general power holders. She was quite honest. In addition, Wanli Guyoli seemed to be very afraid. As the king of the Godslayers, she still took care of Noah when Noah was seriously injured. She was probably also very kind, right? In this way, Noah could not deliberately find fault against his heart. Moreover, the dishes made by Wanli Guyoli were indeed not bad. On the contrary, this kind of home-cooked food made Noah quite like it. So Noah smiled slightly. Not bad, it's delicious. Wanli Guyoli's eyes suddenly lit up, and her expression suddenly became cheerful. You like it? It's really great. It's good that you can be happy. Noah curled his lips. While eating the dishes made by Wanli Guyoli, he talked to himself. So the person over there, it's almost time for you to come out, right? This sentence, unsurprisingly, made Wanli Guyoli startled. Immediately afterward, Wanli Guyoli seemed to feel something, and her expression began to look around with a serious expression. However, it was different from Noah. The reason why this girl found something wrong was entirely because of her overly keen intuition. In the next second, a helpless and frivolous laughter that was mixed with bitter laughter sounded from the surroundings. Really worthy of being the strongest king, and the witch with outstanding spiritual sense. This little trick really can't be hidden from the two of you? As such a voice sounded, a figure slowly emerged from the corner of the room. Seeing this person, Wanli Guyoli was slightly surprised. Mr. Gonzai? Sorry, Miss Yoli, I left the king to you alone to take care of. Gonzai smiled at Wanli Guyoli, then looked at Noah, bowed his head and saluted. I'm Gonzai Dongma of the History Compilation Committee. I have something to discuss with you. I wonder if I can borrow some time? Chapter 1397. The History Compilation Committee? Noah stopped what he was doing, and his curiosity was slightly aroused. It is said that it is the only formal organization with the nature of spells in this country, right? Isn't it amazing? This was not a polite remark. In Europe, there were countless magic associations active in the mysterious world that ordinary people could not touch. After all, Europe was the birthplace of magic, and it was also a place where various myths and legends were extremely popular. All kinds of magic power that had been passed down from ancient times to the present had accumulated, and naturally, it had become the phenomenon of many factions. In this country, there were not so many associations with the nature of spells. There was only one that even monopolized the power of official organizations. Anyone would think that the History Compilation Committee was not simple. In this regard, Gonchi Winterhorse just smiled perfunctorily. You must be joking. Unlike a big place like Europe, we are just an organization in a small island country at the end of the East. We only have a little influence here. Unlike those famous magic associations, even in various places around the world, they can more or less show a little power, right? This was also a fact. It was precisely because this country's geographical location was relatively remote, and its territory was not comparable to other countries that it could develop into a situation where there was only one force that could cover the sky. In fact, in Italy, although there were so many magic associations, but the magic associations that really stood at the top in terms of power and influence, almost every one of them was comparable to the History Compilation Committee. For example, both the Red Copper Black Cross and the Bronze Black Cross that Erica and Liliana belonged to had as much power as the History Compilation Committee. As for the Sage Parliament, which specialized in the study of the Godslayer and the God of Disobedience, Because of its special nature, there was no way to compare it. However, with Princess Alice, who was known as the most elegant and beautiful in Europe, as the former speaker, it was enough to prove that the sage parliament was not simple. Noah was clear about this, Gonchi Winterhorse was also clear about this, and even Wanli Guyuli was very clear about this. However, even if it was clear, no one would discuss this matter. The reason was simple. Even the most outstanding forces were extremely fragile in the face of the God Slayer and the God of disobedience. Although Noah did not have the idea of looking down on the forces of this world, he did not really regard them as a threat. Therefore, Noah didn't care too much about it. As for Wanli Guyoli and Gonchi Dongma, they were also aware of this fact. Naturally, they would not embarrass themselves in front of Noah. Immediately, the three of them fell into silence. Noah ate silently. On the other hand, Wanli Guyoli and Gonchi Dongma didn't even dare to breathe. They quietly waited for Noah to speak. This state lasted for about 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Noah slowly finished all the dishes cooked by Wanli Guyoli. After that, he put the empty bowl and chopsticks on the tray. After that, he wiped his mouth with a napkin and faintly smiled at Wanli Guyoli. It was very delicious. Thank you for your hospitality. Upon hearing Noah's words, even Wanli Guyoli, who was a little afraid of the Godslayer, couldn't help but relax a little. Then he bowed to Noah. It's just a simple meal. Please don't mind it. Noah smiled and nodded. Immediately, he got out of bed and began to untie the bloody bandage wrapped around his abdomen. Ah! Wanli Guyoli couldn't help but exclaim. After he reacted, he hurriedly said, Wait. Your injury hasn't healed yet. No. Noah shook his head. It's already healed. With such a sentence, Noah directly untied all the bandages on his abdomen. Wanli Guyoli and Gonchi Dongma both saw it. The huge wound that was still left on Noah's abdomen not long ago had now disappeared without a trace. Suddenly, Wanli Guyoli and Gonchi Dongma looked at each other in dismay. The two people who were responsible for rescuing Noah from the wild saw how serious Noah's injury was. The wound that was pierced by the three-headed dragon's sharp claws, even if the highest level of healing spell was used, wouldn't it take a few days to heal? However, Noah had only been unconscious for a day and a night. How could he completely recover from such a huge injury in a day and a night? Sure enough, the God-slayers were a group of extraordinary existences. Noah seemed to have seen through the thoughts of Wanli Guyoli and Ganji Dongma. He placed the blood-stained bandage aside, stroked his unscathed abdomen and shrugged. Don't look at me like that. I just used some convenient means. Even if it's a God-slayer, if he suffered such an injury, without a specialized healing ability, it's impossible for him to recover all at once. After saying that, Noah looked at Gonchi Dongma. So what do you want to discuss with me? Gonchi Dongma hesitated for a moment, then said, Actually, I have already reported to the higher-ups about the king's arrival in our country. And after knowing that the king has come to this country, the elders who have some connections with the official history compilation committee expressed that they want to meet the king. Senior elder. Wanli Guyoli was astonished. He asked cautiously, Mr. Gonchi, the elders you are referring to, are they the ones in Secluded World? Secluded World. Noah was suddenly interested. The elders of the official history compilation committee are actually living in Secluded World? Yes. Gonchi Dongma smiled bitterly. Those elders used to be the elders of this country's spell world, but now they have transcended the mortal world and become extraordinary existences. Among them, there were even people who used to be disobedient gods, but later chose to live in seclusion and entered Secluded World. Oh, Noah narrowed his eyes. Since they are already living in seclusion, then why do they still want to meet me? If possible, I also hope that they can quickly transcend and become Buddhas. Gonchi Dongma spread out his hands. Jumping out from time to meddle in other people's business should be a common problem for the elders. We also have a headache when those elders suddenly come out and tell us what to do. Gone. Mr. Gonchi? Wanli Guyuli said with some confusion. You shouldn't say that, right? Well, in fact it is indeed so. To suddenly request to meet the king, for us it is a bit abrupt, isn't it? Gonchi Dongma said without a care. Then king, I wonder if you can meet with them? Hearing this, Noah's eyes showed traces of thoughtfulness. After a while, Noah suddenly asked, "The disobedient gods will appear in places related to their mythologies. This country has the concept of 8 million gods, so a god should have appeared in the past. Since there is a god, then there will be a god who will come to visit, right?" The sudden question caused Ganfeng Dongma to be slightly startled. He immediately replied, "In the past, there was indeed a king who visited this country. That's true, otherwise it wouldn't make sense." Noah nodded and continued to ask, "Then at that time did the so-called elders meet with those god slayers?" Ganshi Dongma frowned and said with some uncertainty, "They shouldn't have, right? Those elders don't seem to care much about the god slayers." "Oh," Noah smiled indifferently. "Then why do they suddenly want to meet with me, the youngest god slayer?" Ganshi Dongma was stunned. Seeing this, Noah gave the answer. "It's very simple, because I have something that they are interested in, and I have some relationship with the object of their interest." After saying this, Noah looked at Ganshi Dongma with a smile. "So there is no need to meet. Help me tell them that I have no interest in the gods sleeping on this island, so they can rest assured." "Gods?" Ganshi Dongma was shocked. "There's a god sleeping on this island?" Wanli Gu Yoli asked in surprise and bewilderment. "King, is this true?" "Sort of." Noah didn't know what to think and looked at Ganshi Dongma. "By the way, lend me your phone." Chapter 1398. In this world, in order to facilitate communication, Erica and Liliana had also prepared a phone for Noah. However, because phones could not be used in other worlds, Noah had left his phone with Erica and Liliana before leaving this world the last time. Of course, Noah had secretly left his phone behind, and did not tell Erica and Liliana. Otherwise, if the two girls found out that Noah had left his phone behind and could not be contacted, Erica and Liliana would definitely throw a tantrum, right? This time, although Noah did not choose to return to this world after a month, it seemed that only a month had passed since Noah left this world. After all, before Noah left, he had destroyed the volcano and the beach in Nabali because of the battle with Perseus and Yarak. Even if such a major event was hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, it could not be hidden from the forces in the magic world. Of course, this included the official history compilation committee of this country. After asking Winterhorse Ganshi, Noah confirmed that he had only left this world for a month. He just did not know how Erica and Liliana had been doing during this month. Presumably, the two knights had also tried various methods to confirm Noah's whereabouts, right? Unfortunately, in the end it would definitely end in failure. Now that Noah had returned, if he did not contact his two followers, they might reprimand Noah when they found out about his whereabouts, right? Therefore, after borrowing Winterhorse Ganshi's phone, Noah relied on his strong memory to recall Erica's phone number and dialed it. "Although there are a lot of things that I want to talk to you about, you should first tell me where our king is and how he is doing right now." As soon as she received the phone call, Erica said this in a tone that was reminiscent of a fake smile. Although Noah was of a mind to ask how Erica knew that it was him who called when he didn't even say anything, he didn't think it was necessary to ask that question in front of a knight who had mastered all kinds of magic tricks, right? Therefore, Noah answered straightforwardly, "I'm in Japan now." "Japan? That island country?" Erica asked in a displeased tone. "Why did you go to that place?" "Well, for various reasons," Noah said perfunctorily. "All in all, I'm here now. Is everything okay on your side?" A month's time was neither long nor short. If something really troublesome happened, 1 month was enough to raise the level of this troublesome matter several times, or even cause a series of troubles. That was more than enough time. This was especially true when Erica and Liliana were in Italy right now. No matter what, Italy was the base of that astonishingly stupid idiot. If that idiot Tony intends to play any tricks during the period of Noah's absence, I'm afraid that Italy will be directly played by that idiot. Noah only wanted to know if anything had happened in Italy during this period. At the mention of this topic, Erica's voice became serious. "To be honest, we're in big trouble now." "Big trouble?" Noah sensed that something was wrong and said straightforwardly, "Is it related to the deicide? Or the god of disobedience?" In this world, only these two things could make Erica, a knight with extremely high self-esteem, say big trouble. Otherwise, with Erica's strength and ability, it couldn't be easier to deal with it. And it turned out that Noah's guess was correct. It's related to the deicide. Erica sighed. I don't know why, but after you left, the news of you obtaining the Holy Grail suddenly spread throughout the entire magic world in Europe. Now almost all the magic associations in Europe are looking for your whereabouts. Hearing this, Noah frowned. Holy Grail. It was the center of the magical engineering incident caused by the Black Prince Yarek, which had once involved the entire magic world in Europe in an unprecedented battle. This was a sacred relic of the demonic path that had a deep relationship with the goddess of earth, and was even closely related to the god of steel, who was known as the Last King. Not long ago, Noah had snatched it from the hands of its original owner, the being known as the god ancestor Guinevere. Other than Noah and Guinevere, only Erica, Liliana, and Alice knew about this matter. In that case, who was the one who spread the news? After thinking for a while, Noah understood. Guinevere did it, right? I'm afraid so, Erica said. For the Devil Queen, the importance of the Holy Grail is needless to say. Now this divine relic that even the Black Prince Yarek couldn't snatch has fallen into your hands, and she couldn't do anything about it. So naturally she could only follow Athena's method and put the blame on you, then look for an opportunity to snatch the Holy Grail back. That famous demonic Tao sacred tool was of extraordinary significance to the world of magic. After all, in the legends, the so-called Holy Grail was a vessel that contained the blood of Christ and had all kinds of mysterious powers. Some people said that it could rejuvenate people. Some people said that it could bring people back from the dead. Some people said that it could make people immortal. Some people said that it could make people become gods directly. There were all kinds of legends, and in addition to the fact that it was a sacred relic of Christianity, it was natural that it had such a special status. Therefore, as long as one was in the magic world, there was no one who didn't want it. Of course, those who really knew what the Holy Grail that Noah snatched from Guinevere was, knew that its real function was not that. However, this divine relic that was closely related to the gods of snake and steel was so valuable that even the Black Prince Yarek coveted it. Now that the news that Noah had obtained the Holy Grail had spread, it was enough to cause a sensation in the magic world. Especially the Black Prince who had been pursuing the Holy Grail, it was impossible for him not to take action. The troublesome god slayer that Erica mentioned was probably Yarek, right? As expected, Erica immediately said. After the news spread, the Black Prince Yarek came to us directly and forced us to know your whereabouts, but even we didn't know where you were. In the end, he returned without success. However, the royal factory, led by the Black Prince, has been quite active recently, and has even been monitoring me and Lily. Lily and I had no choice but to part ways temporarily and return to our respective magic societies. What about Alice? Noah asked. Since such a big thing has been involved, it's impossible for Alice to sit back and do nothing, right? It should be said that Her Royal Highness has been actively involved in all kinds of troublesome things, right? Erica sighed. The princess seems to be very happy to see the Black Prince running around helplessly trying to find your whereabouts. According to her, in order to give the Black Prince a good blow, she's prepared to use all her power to find you first and then laugh at him. That Her Royal Highness still likes to join in the fun. Noah said, a little speechless. Forget it. Since things have become like this, what are you going to do on your side? For the time being, Lily and I won't go to your side. There are people watching us all the time, Erica said after pondering for a moment. Although the news that you're in Japan shouldn't be hidden for long, as long as you don't do anything eye-catching, you shouldn't be discovered so soon. I'll tell Princess Alice about your news first. When the time comes, Princess Alice will go over to support you. That works too. Noah nodded unenthusiastically. Then I'll stay here for the time being. After chatting with Erica, Noah hung up the phone and laughed bitterly. I've just come back and I'm already in so much trouble? Does life have to be so exciting all the time? Chapter 1399. Just after Noah hung up the phone, a wave of spell power suddenly emerged in midair in front of him. Amidst the sudden fluctuation of spell power, a mobile phone flashed out of it without any warning and fell into Noah's arms. That mobile phone was the one that Noah had left with Erica and Liliana when he left this world the last time. Presumably, Erica had specially used the magic of delivering a letter to transfer it over, right? Although it seemed a little exaggerated to use magic to transfer a mobile phone, it was not surprising when one thought of the things in the mobile phone. Of course, this sentence did not mean that there was anything special about Noah's mobile phone. It was just an ordinary mobile phone. However, in this mobile phone, there were the private phone numbers of the leaders of many famous magic societies in Europe, and even Tony's mobile phone number. With so many powerful people's numbers gathered in this mobile phone, coupled with Noah's status as the seventh Godslayer, he believed that as long as he dialed any one of them, he would be able to do most of the things he wanted to do, right? Therefore, for Noah, this mobile phone was still a little useful. At the very least, he could leave all the trivial chores to the magic societies. This was the relationship between the king and the magician. The king was responsible for fighting the gods. The magician was responsible for dealing with all kinds of trivial matters around the king. It was such a transaction-like relationship. Therefore, Noah did not feel that it was troublesome to carry such a mobile phone with him. He put the mobile phone directly into his arms and returned the mobile phone that Winterhorse Ganji had lent him. "Thank you, you've been a great help." Winterhorse Ganji, who had been silently listening to Noah talk on the phone, took back the mobile phone silently and scratched his head, looking very troubled. A trace of worry also appeared on Wanli Guyoli's face. After hesitating for a while, he mustered up his courage. "Well, my king, are you really going to stay here?" "Why?" Noah raised his eyebrows. "You don't welcome me?" "No, it's not like that." Wanli Guyoli looked as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Looking at Wanli Guyoli's anxious appearance and Ganshi Dongma's troubled expression, Noah shrugged. "I know what you are worried about. Aren't you afraid that I, as a deicide, will cause trouble and affect the safety of the citizens of this country?" Wanli Guyoli and Ganshi Dongma were speechless. Obviously Noah was right. Although this sentence was not pleasant to hear, wherever the Godslayer went, it often symbolized the occurrence of a disaster. This was a fact. So far, among the people Noah had met, whether it was Warban, Luo Hao Yerek or Tony, they were all people who would never care about the problems around them once they wanted to achieve something. If such a person, coupled with a strength that no one could match, wasn't that a disaster? Even Noah himself could not guarantee that he would not do the same thing. Of course, compared to the rest of his kind, Noah was undoubtedly much more rational, but sometimes it was difficult to determine whether it was right or wrong to be too strong. At least, even if Noah deliberately controlled himself, once he was slightly involved in a battle that required a little more serious, it would often cause damage. Even Noah could not control such a thing. And he couldn't passively take a beating just because he didn't want to destroy the environment, right? Then what was the point of fighting? Therefore, this was an almost unsolvable problem. Not to mention Ganshi Dongma, Wanli Guyoli was really worried that the existence of the Godslayer would have some bad effects on this country, right? Ganshi Dongma should also feel that serving a Godslayer was not a good job, right? It was natural that the two of them would have such a reaction. Looking at Wanli Guyoli's extremely worried look, Noah sighed. "Well, don't show such an expression. No matter what, you are my savior. I will try my best not to let the things you are worried about happen." After saying such a sentence, Noah did not pay attention to Wanli Guyoli, who was stunned by his words, and turned his eyes to Ganshi Dongma. "The official history compilation committee, right? How about making a deal?" "A deal?" Ganshi Dongma was stunned at first. Then he smiled bitterly. "King, you are too serious. If you need us to provide power, then just tell us. We don't dare to think about making a deal. I think what you said is really serious." Noah curled his lips and smiled. Originally, the relationship between the Godslayer and the magician was like this. The Godslayer fought against the gods on behalf of humans and protected humans from the hands of the gods. As the representatives of humans, you worship us as kings and obey our orders. This relationship is no different from a deal, right? "Ah." Ganshi Dongma grabbed his hair and said helplessly. "I didn't expect the king to see through it so clearly." "It doesn't matter if you see through it or not. There are good and evil among humans, and there can't be people who are exactly the same among the Godslayers. It doesn't matter if you regard us as monsters, but it's best not to think that monsters will eat humans." Noah spread his hands and said so. "So I will say it directly. For the time being, I will stay in this country and maintain the relationship between the king and the follower with the official history compilation committee. Hearing Noah's words, Wanli Yoli seemed to be a little stunned, but Ganshi Dongma suddenly understood. You mean? Well, in order to not let my existence cause the things that my savior is worried about happen, I will try my best to live like an ordinary person here. Noah said so with a hidden meaning. However, individuals who possess strength are the source of all kinds of trouble in the first place. During this period of time when I don't want to cause trouble, I need a highly capable follower who can help me drive away all the flies and take care of all the trivial matters. Originally, this responsibility was taken up by Erica and Liliana, but now the two girls were under Yarek's surveillance and couldn't immediately rush to Noah's side. So Noah could only look for another target. Although Noah could also use the summoning book that he brought out from the underground library of the great underground tomb in Nassarik to summon servants, those servants were all of the mutants, and to a certain extent, were more dangerous than the Godslayers. Because of this, Noah took a big turn. The official history compilation committee will choose the follower, so it's convenient for you to monitor me, isn't it? Noah said bluntly. On the other hand, if there are disobedient gods on this island while I'm here, then I will be responsible for dealing with them. This relationship between the Godslayer and the magician, let us execute it perfectly. Hearing this, Ganshi Dongma fell silent, and so did Wanli Yoli. After a while, Ganshi Dongma looked up, and his face regained its frivolity. I understand. I will be responsible for reporting to the higher-ups about the follower. I believe they won't refuse to help. It's a great help that the king is so easy to talk to. Mr. Ganshi. Wanli Yoli hurriedly said. That's rude of you to speak like that. It doesn't matter. The so-called deal can only be made when both parties are on equal footing. Noah waved his hand and said indifferently. Compared to this, I'm more concerned about where I should live next. Well. Ganshi Dongma deliberately dragged out his breath and then patted Wanli Yoli's shoulder. Miss Yoli, I'll leave the daily life of the king to you. Huh. Wanli Yoli was stunned at first, and then he exclaimed. Huh. Seeing Wanli Yoli's expression as if he had seen a ghost, Noah couldn't help but feel a little amused, and then said such a sentence with bad intentions. It seems that I have to continue to stay with my savior for a while. Please give me more advice, lovely Miss Witch. Wanli Yoli opened and closed his mouth, and couldn't close it for a long time. After a while, he lowered his head and looked dejected. I understand. Thus, Noah and Wanli Yoli's cohabitation life began. Chapter 1400. In one of the rooms in the Shrine of Seven Heroes, Noah was sitting on a bed with a small silver sword in his hand. After pondering for a while, he converted the energy in his body into the source of divine might. He extracted traces of divine might and infused it into the small silver sword. However, under the infusion of divine aura, the small silver sword that was Noah's elven magic device did not move at all. Its previous brilliance was also gone. After experimenting a few times, Noah sighed in distress. As expected, Aster still hasn't woken up? In Box 54545 Outer Sex Blazing Flame City, during the attack by the Demon King Alliance, Noah used the curse-breaking ability of the Demon Slayer in order to free Letitia from the dragon's body. Furthermore, he used the Dragon Emperor's incarnation to multiply his power several times. Because the multiplication of power was too great, Aster fell into a deep sleep and never woke up. At first, Noah was still worried about Aster's condition. Only after sensing Aster's condition through the elven contract did he feel relieved. Simply put, Aster's hibernation was not because he could not withstand Noah's power, but because Noah's power stimulated Aster's original power, causing Aster's power to gradually awaken. As the strongest sword elven, Aster's true power was not that simple. In the past, in the elemental elven world, Aster did not belong to the camp of the 5 elven kings, nor did he belong to the camp of the dark elven king. He only cared about himself in the war between the two camps. At that time, even the elven kings were afraid of Aster's power, and did not dare to get too close to him. However, it was also because of this great power that ordinary elven users were unable to form a contract with Aster. Even the Saintess of Salvation had to pay the price of her life to use Aster. This could be considered a kind of price. After forming a contract with this kind of elven user, Noah naturally could not unleash Aster's true power as a novice elven user. He had always been working with Aster in various ways. Now, under the stimulation of Noah's authority, the run-in and compatibility between Aster and it seemed to have finally reached the passing line, causing Aster's true power, which even the Elf King feared, to begin to awaken. In order to adapt to the sudden increase in power, Aster fell into a deep sleep. When Aster woke up, Noah's elven user power would have greatly improved, right? I just don't know when she will wake up. Noah stared at the small silver sword in his hand. After a while, he sighed again and gently stroked the sword as he murmured to himself, "Wake up quickly, little girl. Without you accompanying me to sleep, I feel a little lonely." It was unknown if she had heard Noah's words, but the small silver sword flashed with traces of light. Seeing this, Noah smiled slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he raised his hand, causing a wave-like golden ripple to undulate in front of him. He then placed the small silver sword in it. "You should rest well for a while, Aster." After saying this, Noah raised his hand again, causing the wave-like golden ripple to shrink and disappear. Then Noah closed his eyes. I wonder how Letitia and Pest are doing. The contracts with Letitia and Pest still existed, proving that nothing had happened to the two girls. However, Ezidakaha's seal had already been undone. In front of the humans' final trial that even the millions of gods could not do anything about, presumably, the box court would fall into an unprecedented chaos, right? Noah only hoped that the members of No Name would not be involved in it. Unfortunately, this idea was somewhat unrealistic. With the special abilities of 16 Knights Jiyuan Flying Bird, Kasuga Tribes Yao, Black Rabbit and the others, if the three-headed dragon were to wreak havoc in the box court, they would definitely encounter this great demon king. At that time it would be very troublesome. Fortunately, in the battle with Noah, although the three-headed dragon had used the special characteristics of the human's final trial to trick Noah, he had also been beaten up by Noah to the point that he could not even split his body, exposing his fatal weakness. Considering this point, in order to recover from his injuries in spirit, the demonic dragon should temporarily hide for a period of time. Regardless of whether this period of time was long or short, the next time Noah returned to the box court would be a month later in the other world. In a month's time, the three-headed dragon should be able to fully recover, right? However, when he fully recovered, Noah would once again appear in front of the demonic dragon. Therefore, the situation had not developed to the worst yet. Even if something were to happen, Noah still had a resurrection item, so it should not be a big problem. So, the biggest problem is still the riddle of absolute evil? In terms of strength, Noah was on par with Ezidakaha. In fact, he was slightly stronger than him. However, only by unraveling the essence of Ezidakaha's final trial as a human, Noah would be able to defeat the demonic dragon. That lizard's another cosmology simulation is not much of a threat to me, as long as it does not use weapons with a cosmological view outside of Persian mythology. Noah pondered. Although my another cosmology is also useless against him, as long as I can unravel his essence, my warrior will be able to use it and kill him. Therefore, everything was ready, except for the east wind. However, when would the east wind come? That was another question. As expected, it's impossible to think of it in such a short time, right? Noah shook his head. Forget it, it's not a good idea to keep thinking here. Let's go out for a walk and relax first. Thinking like this, Noah suppressed all the thoughts in his heart, got up and walked out of the door. After leaving the room in the shrine, Noah walked on the corridor paved with wooden planks and walked in the direction of the front hall. Along the way, several clergymen dressed as clergymen brushed past Noah, and all of them bowed their heads to greet Noah, and then left without hesitation. Noah naturally did not put on any airs, and when they greeted him, he nodded slightly in return, and then let them leave. Looking at the clergyman's respectful and cautious behavior, it was likely that Wanraku Furukawa or Kaneji Takuma had already mentioned Noah's identity to them, and asked them to treat him with caution. The reason why they just nodded their heads and left without hesitation was probably because they felt that the more they spoke, the more likely they would make mistakes. In order to not provoke Noah's disgust, they treated Noah in this way. This also made Noah understand once again. For the average person, even if it was a magician or a conjurer with superb abilities, a god slayer was an extremely terrifying existence, With such thoughts, Noah came to the front hall of the shrine. Suddenly, Noah's footsteps stopped, and his eyes looked forward. He saw that there, Wanraku Furukawa was holding a broom, sweeping it up and down, and seemed to be somewhat absent-minded. Seeing Wanraku Furukawa like this, Noah blinked, but his footsteps began to move, and he began to walk in the direction of Wanraku Furukawa. Perhaps he heard Noah's footsteps, but Wanraku Furukawa maintained an absent-minded look, turned his head and looked behind him. With this look, Wanraku Furukawa was suddenly startled, and finally recovered from the state of being in a daze and said nervously, King? Noah scratched his cheek and smiled helplessly. Please, can you not call me like this in broad daylight? It's like shameful play. It's quite embarrassing. Shameful play. Wanraku Furukawa was slightly startled, and she asked doubtfully, What is shameful play? Noah choked at once. Although the time spent together was not long, Noah also understood what kind of person Wanraku Furukawa was. In a word, she was a lady of the boudoir. It was normal for this girl not to understand that kind of advanced vocabulary, so Noah cleverly changed the topic. What were you thinking about just now? This sentence made Wanraku Furukawa's pretty face suddenly blush. Chapter 1401. Time went back to yesterday. After a discussion about Noah's temporary stay in Japan, Wanragu Yoli and Kaneji Winterhorse left the room. As soon as they left Noah's room and walked a distance away, Wanragu Yoli, who was holding an empty bowl and plate in her hand, said angrily to Kaneji Winterhorse next to her, Mr. Kaneji, why do you want me to take care of the king? What's wrong? Miss Yoli? Kaneji Winterhorse's attitude was still frivolous. You don't want to? It's not a matter of whether I want to or not, but is it really okay for me to do it? Wanragu Yoli said with some worry. Aren't you worried at all that if I don't treat the king well, all the people in this country will suffer with me? This was what Wanragu Yoli was worried about. For the Godslayer, Wanragu Yoli had always maintained a fear in her heart. Noah's performance was quite normal, which made Wanragu Yoli feel a little closer to him inconceivably. But Noah was still a demon king after all. And Wanragu Yoli was just one of the many witches in Japan's curse world. Moreover, Wanragu Yoli admitted that she had not mastered any skills to please people. So, compared to Wanragu Yoli, there should be more people who were more suitable to take care of Noah, right? Wanragu Yoli was only worried that if because of her relationship with Noah, the existence known as the Demon King would vent his anger on this country, then her sin would be really big. Therefore, Wanragu Yoli was not unwilling to take care of Noah, but she was worried that she would not do well and implicate others. What do you want to say? I don't understand. Kaneji Winterhorse glanced at Wanragu Yoli. But, Miss Yoli, what kind of relationship should we establish with the king in the future? And how should we get along with him? These need to be explored repeatedly. Before that, if we act rashly, we don't know when we will step on a landmine and cause the king to be unhappy. You should also know how terrible the Godslayer is, right? Winterhorse Ganshi took off his glasses, took out a piece of cloth from his arms, and said while wiping his glasses, Although the king has only been a Godslayer for less than half a year, he is more powerful than the rest of the Godslayers. Even the two oldest demon kings, Marquis Waban and Hierarch Luo Hao, as well as the King of Swords of Italy, are no match for him. We can't imagine how powerful he is. Saying this, Mr. Ganjin put on his glasses again. So, if possible, we should try our best to maintain a good relationship with him. It was understandable that the Winter Horse would be so cautious. In Europe, where magic originated, almost every magic association knew how to get in touch with the king and how to deal with him, because they had coexisted with many deicides so far. As for the official history compilation committee, although they had several encounters with the deicide, their experience was not as rich as that of Europe. After all, it was just an island country on the world map. Whether it was in terms of territory or population, it was considered small compared to the real big countries. Under such circumstances, it was natural that they did not have as much experience with the gods and the deicide as other countries. In order not to rashly cause trouble, we can't act rashly at the moment, Winterhorse Ganshi said. But we can't just leave the king alone. That would be the worst way to deal with it. After thinking about it again and again, I can only think of letting Miss Yuli take care of the king. That is undoubtedly the most suitable. I'm the most suitable? Wanli Yoli was a little confused. Why? It's very simple. Because you are the savior of the king. Even if you do something bad by accident, the king will forgive you on account of this, right? Winter Horse Ganqi said directly. Moreover, although he is a great demon king with the power of a god, the king is still a young man after all. So, it is also a classical and royal practice to have beautiful and lovely girls serve him, right? What? Wanli Yoli's pretty face instantly turned red because of Winter Horse Ganqi's words. She said in disbelief. Do you want me to? That's about it, right? Winter Horse Ganqi said in a malicious tone. Although I'm very sorry, Miss Yoli, I still hope that you can maintain a close relationship with the king. The closer the better. Please don't make such a joke. Wanli Yoli shouted with a red face. How can I do such a shameless thing? You can't say that, Miss Yoli, Winter Horse Ganqi said in a kind way. Since ancient times, beautiful girls have been a long-lasting and powerful weapon, especially when they are used to deal with kings with status, power. They can exert an unimaginable influence. If you can establish a close relationship with the king and make him obey you, don't you think that it will be a good thing for us in this country? Why do we have to do that? Wanli Yoli couldn't help but ask. Although the king is a godslayer, we can use communication to understand each other, can't we? That is also a way, but it is definitely not a good way. Winter Horse Ganqi shook his head. Men are creatures. No matter how rational, serious, and honest they are, as long as a cute girl asks them to do something, they will still hesitate. I am the same. Winter Horse Ganqi didn't notice Wanli Yoli's look as if she was looking at something dirty, and kept talking. For young men, there is nothing more valuable than a cute girl. Especially a girl like Miss Yoli who blushes and says things like, I'm not doing it for your own good. That's even more against the rules. Yes, this is cute. I can't understand what you are saying at all. Wanli Yoli said coldly. No matter what, it is unreasonable to ignore a woman's thoughts and let her play the role of someone else's lover. Right? Of course, it won't be the kind of practice that forces others. Winter Horse Ganqi seemed to have calmed down from his inexplicable enthusiasm and excitement and shrugged. I just think that Miss Yoli's words will definitely achieve the results we expect. If you don't want to, I will report it to the people above and let them find some volunteers to perform this task. Wanli Yoli was at a loss. Volunteers? Does Miss Yoli think that no one will be willing to do this kind of thing? Winter Horse Ganqi waved his hand. Then you are a little naive, Miss Yoli. Although the Godslayer is terrible, on the other hand, it is because of this that they are the most reliable. They are called kings, and they have unparalleled power and status. If you can become a popular person by their side, don't you think that it will be of great benefit to you and your force? Wanli Yoli understood what Winter Horse Ganqi said. However, understanding didn't mean that Wanli Yoli could accept it. For this honest and serious young miss of the boudoir, this kind of thing was too advanced. Seeing that Wanli Yoli didn't know what to say, Winter Horse Ganqi tentatively asked, Does Miss Yoli hate the king? Hate? Wanli Yoli was slightly surprised, and then shook his head like a rattle drum. No, it's not like that. It's better to say that I think he is easier to talk to than the Marquis, the Godslayer. He is also a little gentle. I definitely don't mean to hate him. Seeing this, Winter Horse Ganqi showed a victorious smile. In that case, how about you try to become good friends with the king a little? It won't be so difficult to accept, right? Hearing this, Wanli Yoli opened his mouth slightly, and finally he could only nod. Chapter 1402. Recalling the conversation with the winter horse at that time, Wanrefurifuru's face couldn't help but turn red. She felt that her cheeks were burning. Although the final result of the discussion was to let Wanrefurifuru try to be good friends with Noah. Whether it was a girlfriend or a good friend, first of all it was necessary to have a good relationship. And to have a good relationship with a boy, Wanrefurifuru had never tried it. Wanrefurifuru had two identities. The other was a very ordinary high school student's superficial identity. The other was her identity as the witch Yuan of the spell world. In terms of appearance, Wanli Yuli was just a student in a school that was not very famous, nor was he a declining school. Although he participated in a club, he was only a member of a tea ceremony club. The girls in the club were all well-educated and cultivated girls. In addition, Wanrofurifuru's appearance was actually very outstanding. In the eyes of others, she seemed to be a lady from a prestigious family. In the school, she was recognized as the campus belle. With these two identities, there were many people of the opposite sex who yearned for Wanrofurifuru, but there was not a single person of the opposite sex who really interacted with her. And in terms of her identity, as a witch, Wanrofurifuru naturally had no chance to contact the opposite sex. In fact, the title of Yuan was a title given to the most outstanding of the witches. Wanrofurifuru's family, which Wanrofurifuru was from a long time ago, often gave birth to children with psionic ability. It was considered a rather famous family in Japan's magic world. Wanrofurifuru was raised with the goal of becoming a witch from a young age. In order to cultivate, Wanrofurifuru had gone out of the country, and also entered the deep mountains and forests, but almost all of them were with her classmates and friends who also cultivated with the goal of becoming a witch. Of course, there was no chance to contact the opposite sex. As a result, whether it was her identity or her identity, Wanrofurifuru had no experience of close contact with the opposite sex. Now suddenly Wanrofurifuru had a good relationship with the opposite sex. How could this innocent lady not be confused? Therefore, even when Wanrofurifuru was cleaning, she was somewhat absent-minded, thinking about such things. Under such circumstances, Noah's question made Wanli Guyoli's face turn red in an instant. Seeing Wanli Guyoli suddenly blushing, Noah felt somewhat strange and took a few steps forward. "What's wrong? Why is your face so red?" After saying that, Noah very naturally reached out his hand and placed it on Wanli Guyoli's forehead. Then, he placed the other hand on his own forehead and compared the temperature of the two hands. "You seem to have a fever. Are you okay?" When Noah put his hand on Wanli Guyoli's forehead, Wanli Guyoli's entire body went blank. When she came back to her senses, she saw Noah checking her body temperature in an extremely natural manner. Wanli Guyoli's originally very red face suddenly seemed to be boiling, the color constantly darkening. "No, why is it getting hotter?" Noah frowned. "Do you really have a fever? Then it's better to quickly take a rest." Hearing this, Wanli Guyoli resisted the urge to turn around and run away. Because of the intense shyness, she felt that even her head was a little dizzy. Her expression was stiff as she spoke. No need. I'm fine." Unfortunately, Wanli Guyoli didn't know that in this state, the more she said so, the less convincing it seemed. In addition, Wanli Guyoli was the kind of person who would give people the impression that she was too serious and honest. When she said such words, it gave people a feeling of insincerity. So Noah narrowed his eyes. "I see. Indeed, you look like the kind of person who will force himself. To deal with this kind of person at this time, you should use a little tough approach." A little tough approach? Wanli Guyoli was slightly stunned. Just when Wanli Guyoli was stunned, Noah suddenly stepped forward, bent down, and carried Wanli Guyoli, who couldn't react in time. Yes, Noah carried Wanli Guyoli. Moreover, it was a standard princess carry. Hey. Wanli Guyoli was completely stunned. After Noah's unique masculine breath rushed to the tip of Wanli Guyoli's nose, Wanli Guyoli came back to her senses. Her face quickly turned red as if it would emit steam. "King." Wanli Guyoli was at a loss of what to do. She could only open her mouth with a red face. What are you going to do?" "I want you to take a rest," Noah said matter-of-factly. Ignoring Wanli Guyoli's panic, he carried the girl and walked in the direction of the inner hall of the shrine. "Anyway, if I just persuade you, you will definitely say that you are fine, right?" I'm really fine." Wanli Guyoli was so shy that she didn't even know where to put her hands. Please put me down. After I put you in bed, I will naturally put you down." Noah ignored Wanli Guyoli's loud reprimand and walked on the wooden corridor in his own way. He didn't even turn his eyes to Wanli Guyoli and said so. "Before that, you just need to be obedient. This is too rude." Wanli Guyoli blushed and stared at Noah. "Even if you are the king, forcing others to do things that they don't want to do is already disgraceful as a person. That's also relatively speaking." Noah looked like he didn't want to take advantage of her. If the essence is for someone's good and the result is not bad, then it is not a bad thing. Anyway, I'm not forcing you to have a good relationship with any man. What's the problem? However, those words instead caused an intense reaction from Wanli Guyoli. Have a good relationship with any man. Wanli Guyoli shouted with some excitement. I won't do that kind of shameless thing. Is it? Noah, who was frightened by Wanli Guyoli's overly excited reaction, said very strangely. I just said it casually. Why are you so angry? Casually said it. Wanli Guyoli seemed to be really angry. You are the king. Since you are the king, you should consider your usual words and actions. Your words and sentences may affect the whole world. Please be a little conscious of your identity and actions. Seeing Wanli Guyoli's inexplicable angry look, Noah secretly felt puzzled and said, in short, I don't care how you want to mess around, but since I have seen it, don't mess around under my eyes. This sentence should be said by me. Wanli Guyoli subconsciously put his hand around Noah's neck and looked straight at Noah with a serious expression. Because you're the king, no one cares about you no matter how you act. But since you're in front of me, I won't just watch you act recklessly. I hope you can listen to me a little. Oh. Noah raised his eyebrows. In other words, as long as I listen to you, you will also listen to me? As long as I listen to you, you will listen to me. The redness on Wanli Guyoli's face gradually faded. After pondering for a while, his eyes met with Noah's. If I listen to you in the future, will you also listen to me? Seeing Wanli Guyoli's extremely serious look, Noah seemed to have seen through his thoughts, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. It's not impossible to consider. Wanli Guyoli suddenly became silent, and then nodded firmly. I understand. I will listen to you in the future, so I hope the king can also listen to my advice in normal times. Then it's settled. Noah nodded. Wanli Guyoli heaved a huge sigh of relief, and his shoulders relaxed. Soon after, he shyly hid his face in Noah's arms. In this way, Noah carried Wanli Guyoli and walked into the girls' room. Chapter 1403. While the relationship between Noah and Wanli Guyoli was developing smoothly, on the other side, Ganshi Dongma encountered an unexpected obstacle. In order to prepare enough followers for Noah, Ganshi Dongma had been running around in the past few days. Although he kept saying, making people stay up late and work overtime for several days and nights in a row without sleeping, even the most black-hearted company wouldn't do such an unreasonable thing as expected I should ask for a raise. He didn't feel nervous or complain at all, but when he did things, he didn't drag his feet at all. In order to find a suitable follower candidate, Ganshi Dongma had indeed not slept for several days. Of course, as a member of the official history compilation committee, Ganshi Dongma had also received no less than the spell training of a formal conjurer, and his own spell cultivation was also very high. For Ganshi Dongma, not sleeping for several days and nights was not a very difficult thing to endure. However, at this time, the member of the official history compilation committee was at the foot of a mountain, leaning his body on the door of the car parked next to him, and sighed with a tired face. What are those old people thinking? This sentence received a sudden response. In fact, Hui Na doesn't know what Grandpa is thinking. But since Hui Na received the order, she can only act according to the order. Hearing such a voice, Ganshi Dongma reacted. This was a very rare thing. As a well-trained person, Ganshi Dongma was rarely approached to the position where even the voice could be transmitted so clearly, but he didn't notice anyone approaching. However, the owner of this voice did it. Moreover, this voice was not like Ganshi Dongma's, full of calmness and maturity. It was extremely light and clear, and only a young girl's voice could be heard. Ganshi Dongma, who had already known what kind of identity and ability the other party had, was not surprised at all. He just raised his head and looked in the direction of the mountain. On the only path that led to the foot of the mountain, a young girl was walking out of the depths of the mountain in a very natural manner without the slightest sound of footsteps. It was a graceful girl who was only about 16 or 17 years old. The girl had beautiful long straight black hair, and she was wearing a white shirt, a khaki vest, and a short skirt, as if she was a high school student. However, the girl also had factors that ordinary students didn't have. For example, the average student wouldn't have a face as beautiful as a young girl's, so beautiful that it would cause people to raise their eyebrows. For example, ordinary students wouldn't have the aura of Yamato Nadeshiko, which was close to nature and extremely elegant and gentle like a young girl. For example, ordinary students wouldn't go in and out of the mountain alone like the girl. For example, ordinary students wouldn't be like the girl, carrying a long cloth bag on the side of the shoulder. The moment he saw the girl, Ganshi Dongma glanced sideways at the long cloth bag for the first time, and after a flash of a hidden look in his eyes, he retracted his gaze and helplessly spoke to the girl who approached him. "Long time no see, Miss Hui Na. I didn't expect that one day I would see you interrupt your most important cultivation for such a matter." For Ganshi Dongma, it doesn't matter which side it is, the girl said in a polite but straightforward and cheerful tone. Ganshi Dongma doesn't hate to cultivate in the mountains, but she also doesn't hate to live in the city, and there are indeed many convenient things in the city that are not available in the mountains, which can save a lot of trouble for Ganshi Dongma. For humans who are used to all kinds of convenient things in the modern world, life in the mountains is unimaginably difficult, and Ganshi Dongma can actually save a lot of trouble to get over it, which is admirable. Ganshi Dongma said insincerely. "I've heard about this from the people above, Ganshi Dongma. What should I say?" "What?" Ganshi Dongma tilted her head, as if she was naive and romantic. "Mr. Ganshi, do you think Ganshi Dongma doesn't have the ability to be the king's guard?" "You're joking." Ganshi Dongma smiled bitterly. "If even Ganshi Dongma doesn't have the ability to be the king's follower, then I can guarantee that no one in the world can be the king's follower." "Grandpa said so too." Ganshi Dongma nodded. "That's why Grandpa asked Ganshi Dongma to go to the king's side." "Is that really the case?" Ganshi Dongma curled his lips and smiled. "Although I don't want to be too explicit, but just because the king asked for a follower, he personally gave the order and sent Ganshi Dongma to the king's identity, ignoring our dissuasion. To be honest, it has caused us a lot of trouble. There's no other way, because that's Grandpa's request. I can't go against it." Ganshi Dongma lowered his head and apologized in a seemingly polite manner, but in fact there was no apology at all. "I'm really sorry for causing you trouble." "It's nothing, I'm just following orders anyway." Ganshi Dongma sighed. "It's just that, for that old man to actually give such an order for such a thing, we have to think about whether there's any reason behind it." Ganshi Dongma isn't very clear about what Grandpa is thinking. As Ganshi Dongma said this, a fierce smile like a warrior appeared on her beautiful face. "However, regarding the king that everyone has been talking about, Hui Na is a bit interested. If possible, I really want to meet the king as soon as possible." After saying this, Ganshi Dongma slightly lifted the long cloth bag she was carrying on her shoulder. "Tian Songyun also thinks the same, right?" The moment the words fell, there was only a short moment, but a trace of hidden power leaked out from the long cloth bag and disappeared in a flash. Feeling the hidden power fluctuation, Ganshi Dongma's eyes once again showed a look of fear. Wanli Guyoli, who was half forced by Noah to rest, did obediently follow Noah's instructions that day, lying in bed and sleeping for the whole day. In fact, Wanli Guyoli didn't have a fever at all, but because she was too shy, her temperature rose so much. Noah didn't know about the secret agreement between Wanli Guyoli and Ganshi Dongma. Therefore, he didn't think that a girl who had just known him for a few days would suddenly become shy in front of him. As a result, such a beautiful misunderstanding was created. In this way, Wanli Guyoli was embarrassed to say it, and could only hold a trace of guilt of lying, and obediently took a day of rest. Such an abundant amount of sleep made Wanli Guyoli wake up early the next morning. Because it was still a hot season, Wanli Guyoli, who slept for a whole day, sweated a lot. Therefore, Wanli Guyoli decided to take a bath first and clean his body. After removing his clothes in the bathroom, Wanli Guyoli looked at his reflection in the mirror in front of him. Her skin was as white as ivory, translucent and delicate. His figure was slender and wonderful, as if it would break with a snap. However, the place where it should be protruded was full of weight, and the place where it should be concave didn't have a trace of excess fat. Such a figure, although it couldn't be said to be extremely full, but the curves were clear, and it was also full of charm. In the past, Wanli Guyoli never cared about his figure. At most, he just thought that it would be better to be thinner than now. But now, as Wanli Guyoli looked at the reflection of her naked body in the mirror, she actually murmured out loud as if at the behest of gods and demons. "If it's a boy, will he like this figure?" Wanli Guyoli, who was muttering to himself, quickly woke up, and his face was red because of shame. What am I thinking about? This statement was like preparing to use this body to do something in front of a boy, wasn't it? Because of her bold words, the innocent girl felt so ashamed that she wanted to die. She quickly ran into the bathroom and took a cold shower. After taking a bath, Wanli Guyoli finally recovered his calmness. Wearing a witch costume, she came out of the bathroom and came to the main hall of the shrine. However, when Wanli Guyoli arrived in front of the main hall of the shrine and was ready to carry out the daily cleaning, two figures just walked up the stone steps. Chapter 1404. Wanli Guyoli, who was just about to get a broom, saw two people slowly walking up the stone steps and was completely stunned. To be more precise, it should be said that after seeing one of them, he was stunned. It was Hui Na and Kaneji Winterhorse. A man and a woman leisurely walked up the long stone steps that most people would definitely feel tired after walking the entire way, and arrived in front of the shrine. As soon as she saw Wanli Guyoli, Kaneji Winterhorse used a frivolous attitude to greet her. "Hello, Miss Yoli." "Yo Yoli." Hui Na greeted her in a friendly tone. "Long time no see. Seeing that you're doing well, I'm really relieved." Hui Na. Wanli Guyoli finally reacted and exclaimed, Why are you here?" Obviously, Wanli Guyoli and the girl called Hui Na knew each other, and were even familiar with each other. "What? Yoli, you haven't heard of me?" Hui Na said with a somewhat surprised expression. "I heard that the king is here." So Hui Na thought that Yoli must know that the king is looking for a follower. Follower? Wanli Guyoli was stunned and then understood. In other words, Hui Na was sent by the committee to be Mr. Noah's follower? Oh! Kaneji Winterhorse raised her eyebrows, and a malicious smile suddenly appeared on her face. "Mr. Noah?" Yoli actually called the king's name directly. Hui Na was also a little surprised, but then she understood. Right on the way here, Mr. Kaneji also said that Yoli is preparing to develop a very close relationship with the king. Seems that Yoli is doing a good job. It's really surprising that the obedient girl Yoli actually did it. When she saw Kaneji Winterhorse's malicious smile, Wanli Guyoli realized that she had misspoken. Now, Hui Na's words made the innocent girl's pretty face turn red, and she said angrily and shyly, "I'm not preparing to become that kind of relationship." "Hui Na, don't make it sound like I'm indecent." "Is that so?" Hui Na asked strangely. But Mr. Kaneji said that Yoli is working hard to maintain a close relationship with the king for the sake of the people of this country. Hui Na admired Yuli at that time. I didn't do such a great thing." Wanli Guyoli quickly waved her hand and shook her head. "I just tried my best to entertain Mr. Noah as a guest. And Mr. Noah is not the kind of king who will casually do something harmful to others. Yesterday they had just opened up to each other and had a conversation." When she said this sentence, Guyuli Yuli Yuli Guyuli Yuli was very confident when she said this sentence, she Guyuli to the end. Kaneji Winter Guyoli was surprised Yuli Guyoli. Although he verbally ridiculed Guyoli, Kaneji Winter Guyoli did not think that in just one day, Guyoli's pure character would have any breakthrough progress with Noah. Since this was the case, Kaneji Winter Guyoli, who had an excessive fear of Yoli Kaneji Winter Guyoli, felt that this matter was worth considering. After all, Guyoli's talent in spirit vision was almost unparalleled. The so-called spirit vision was actually a kind of revelation. Guyoli's intuition was also quite sharp, almost to the point of being able to match Noah's sensing ability. In this way, the reason why Guyoli was so confident was very likely that her keen intuition told her that Noah was such a person. This could make Kaneji Winter Guyoli feel a little relieved. As for Hui Na, after pondering for a while, she seemed to have made up her mind and raised her head. If that's the case, let Hui Na take Yoli's place and build a good relationship with the king. Such an abrupt statement not only stunned Wanli Guyoli, but also Ganqi Dong Ma. Under such circumstances, Hui Na said bluntly, "Actually, although I'm here to be the king's guard and follower, Grandpa also specially told me that if I can develop a close relationship with the king, then I should let Hui Na do it." Grandfather? Wanli Guyoli said with some uncertainty. "Are you referring to that old man?" Tsumatsuma had said that in Yushur, there was a group of elders of the Japanese spell world who lived in seclusion there. Among them, there was even the former god of disobedience. The grandfather that Hui Na spoke of and the old teacher that Wanli Guyu Li and Ganjin Dongma spoke of were all referring to the god of disobedience. The reason why Hui Na called him grandfather was that they had a close relationship. That god had even given her a god relic. Since it's grandpa's order, even the committee won't have an opinion. Moreover, Hui Na is not uninterested in this matter. While saying that, Hui Na lifted the cloth bag on her shoulder. Not only Hui Na, but Tian Songyun is also very interested in the king. Hearing this, Wanli Gyuli unconsciously cast his gaze towards the long cloth bag. The moment he saw the cloth bag, Wanli Guyoli's heart started beating rapidly. With Wanli Guyoli's keen intuition, he could clearly feel it. In that cloth bag there was a terrifying spell that was difficult for others to feel. That was a level of spell that ordinary humans, or even powerful magicians and spellcasters could not have. Although that level of curse power was not as strong as that of the God Slayer and the God of Disobedience, it was not weaker than that of the divine beasts that were known as the followers of the gods, who were comparable to the highest-ranking holy knights in Europe. Because of that, the existence of the cloth bag was necessary. The cloth bag was specially woven to block the power of the curse. Even so, Wanli Guyoli's spiritual sense could still sense its aura. It was the god relic that was given to Hui Na by the god. That was why Gonzue Winterhorse would say, "If even Ms. Hui Na is not capable of being the king's follower, I can guarantee that no one in the world can be the king's follower." After using the god relic, Hui Na's strength was one of the best in the world. He was one of the best. Even Erica and Liliana, who were known as prodigies, could not be compared to this girl. After all, this girl was special. Compared to the god ancestor, she was not inferior. Anyway, Hui Na is going to see the king now. Hui Na put the cloth bag back on her shoulder and smiled at Wanli. "Wanli, quickly take Hui Na to see the king." "I know." Wanli Guyoli looked away from the cloth bag and nodded. "So Hui Na, Mr. Gonzue, please come with me." However, at this moment an accident happened. Buzz, accompanied by a buzzing sound that seemed to tremble the entire space. A surge of spell power surged like a crazy roaring wave from one of the corners of the shrine and burst into the sky. The invisible curse power directly turned into a substantial pressure, causing the entire space to become heavy. At the same time, the surrounding air was fiercely pressed down. Hui Na, Gonzue Winterhorse, and Wanli Guyoli's expressions changed at the same time. Then their shoulders sank, as if they were suppressed by an invisible heavy burden, and their bodies sank. However, the three of them had completely different reactions. Wanli Guyoli, who had an extraordinary talent in the field of spirit vision but whose body was weaker than an ordinary person, immediately paled and sat on the ground paralyzed. Gonzue Winterhorse, who had a high cultivation in spells but was not good at face-to-face combat, also suddenly fell and lay on the ground in an extremely embarrassing manner. Only Hui Na felt her body sink slightly, and she knelt on the ground with one knee. Although she was not as embarrassed as Wanli Guyoli and Gonzue Winterhorse, a trace of sadness flashed across her pretty face. What's wrong?" Hui Na bit her lips, enduring the terrifying spell power, and said in an extremely uncomfortable voice, "What happened? That direction?" Wanli Guyoli looked at the center of the spell power with a shocked expression. "That's the direction of Mr. Noah's room." His words made Hui Na and Gonzue Winterhorse's expressions change. Chapter 1405. Ugh? In the hallway of the shrine, the clergy fell to the ground one by one, as if they were carsick with a look of discomfort. Of course that was to be expected. Unlike Yukari, who was in charge of guarding the shrine, although some of the clergy in this shrine also had some cultivation in curses, they weren't very proficient in it. Yukari, who was in charge of guarding the shrine, was officially commissioned by the Official History Compilation Committee to be a spiritual ability user sent here. Because the places she was sent to were all important spiritual power centers located in different parts of the country, the command system was completely different. Therefore, even the shrine's chief couldn't give orders to Yukari, but treated her as a noble guest. Therefore, under normal circumstances in a shrine, the person with the most outstanding cultivation in curses was usually Yukari, who was in charge of guarding the shrine, and not the clergy. Using the entertainment industry as an example, it was the difference between celebrities and staff, that's all. In this way, it naturally led to the clergy who didn't have a high cultivation in curses, or who didn't have a trace of attainment in curses, to be suppressed by the pressure of the curses in the air like a heavy pressure, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. In such a situation, Manatsuki Yuri, Kei-na, and Kanji Takuma all desperately raised the curses in their bodies to resist the heavy pressure around them, as if they were against an invisible wind, and walked forward with difficulty. Looking around, looking at the clergy who fell to the ground one by one, as if they were suffering from car sickness, Manatsuki Yuri said with great concern. They should be fine, right? Don't worry, it's just a reaction similar to car sickness. Although it's uncomfortable, it's not serious. Kanji Takuma said with some seriousness. Although the curses in the air are extremely large, there's no specific target, just like when we usually raise the curses in our bodies, it's just naturally letting the curses out of our bodies, it's not intended to cause any harm, so there's no problem. Just raising the curses in our bodies, Manatsuki Yuri said with some disbelief. Just raising the curses in our bodies caused this kind of result? I don't want to believe it, that's too exaggerated. Kanji Takuma smiled bitterly. However, this is the only way to explain why ordinary people, who don't have any spell power, would only feel dizzy under such an exaggerated fluctuation of spell power. With such an amazing curse power, if it was really aimed at someone, then the entire shrine would be blown away, right? Huina also put forward her own opinion, but there was a faint light in her eyes. It's amazing. Is this the power of a king? As they spoke, the three of them arrived at the center of the tremor of the curse power. This was where Noah's room was located. Buzz. An enormous amount of curse power that could not be seen with the naked eye kept passing through the door like a terrifying gust of wind. Wanli Guyoli, Huina, and Ganjin Dongma felt as if they were standing on the edge of an abyss. It was as if they were enduring a cold wind from the depths of hell. A trace of discomfort appeared on their faces. Under such circumstances, the three of them could only raise the curse power in their bodies again, allowing the curse power to flow in their bodies to resist the incoming pressure. Although doing so would cause the curse power to be drained at an extremely fast speed. If they did not do so, apart from Huina who had a god relic protecting her, Wanli Guyoli and Ganjin Dongma would fall to the ground like the other priests, unable to move at all. Mr. Noah. Wanli Guyoli walked forward with worry written all over her face. Just when she was about to open the door, Huina stopped her. Let Huina do it, Huina suggested. Behind the door, the fluctuation of the curse power is already so strong. If the door is opened, it will be even more terrifying. With Yoli's strength, he may not be able to withstand it. So let Huina do it. Although Wanli Guyoli was also an outstanding witch, her true strength lay in the aspect of spirit vision. Her attainments in other areas could only be considered as proficient, but not outstanding. On the contrary, Huina not only had a god relic protecting her body, but she was also involved in both martial arts and curses. In order to cultivate, she had been training hard in the mountains. In addition to her frequent contact with the god who gave her the god relic, she had experienced the enormous power that humans could not possess. She was also one of the top powerhouses among humans, so naturally, she was more suitable than Wanli Guyoli to be the vanguard. Therefore, Wanli Guyoli did not refuse and obediently stood behind Huina. Ganjin Dongma stood behind Huina as well, but he stood in front of Wanli Guyoli. Clearly, he wanted to help Wanli Guyoli resist the incoming curse power. Just like that, Huina opened the door in a straightforward manner. Buzz! In an instant, the sea of curse power that was comparable to a storm surged out of the room like a surging wave, attacking the group of people. The stormy waves of curse power surged out. Even though Wanli Guyoli, Huina, and Ganji Dongma were mentally prepared, their complexions couldn't help but change. They tried their best to increase the curse power in their bodies to resist the berserk curse power fluctuations. Fortunately, the incoming wave of curse power was just like what Ganjin Dongma had said. It was not targeted. It was just like when ordinary humans increased the curse power in their bodies, the curse power would naturally seep out of their bodies. It did not have any substantial power. All the gods in Japanese mythology were created by these two gods in various ways or gave birth to their children. Susanoo was Izunagi's son. Susanoo's full name was Susanoo. He possessed many attributes and was known as the god of storm. He was also known as the god of destruction because of his violent nature. At the same time, he possessed the divinity of the god of earth. Later on, he became the god of conquest and the god of heroes because of various mythical deeds. This god could control storms and was also a user of steel. When this god was mentioned, it was impossible not to think of him as the most famous god in Japanese mythology. In order to save the girl who was sacrificed to the famous monster in Japanese mythology, Yamada no Orochi, Susanoo killed Yamada no Orochi and took a sword from its tail. That sword was the Kusanagi sword, also known as the Kusanagi sword. Since then, Susanoo became the hero who killed Yamada no Orochi, also known as the god of steel. The Kusanagi sword was later passed down in Japan and became a symbol of royalty because of its special status. In fact, in Noah's Gate of Babylon, the famous king's sword was also sleeping. That was why Noah understood that the pitch-black divine blade in front of him was not the real heavenly sword of clouds. However, from the fact that the sword was Susanoo's subordinate god, it was not an exaggeration to call it the real thing. After all, this sword was a subordinate god that Susanoo created based on his own legend in the myths. Unfortunately, although the sword had Susanoo's divine power, it did not have a symbol of royalty. That was because the Kusanagi sword had been passed down from Susanoo's hands to the next generation. In Noah's Gate of Babylon, the Kusanagi sword's ability was a symbol of royalty. It was the way of the king and the sword of the king. The sword in front of him was just a divine relic and a subordinate god that embodied Susanoo's power. Presumably, the sword's ability should be similar to Susanoo's authority, right? Susanoo, the conquering god of steel? Noah thought to himself. The sleeping strongest steel that Pandora mentioned shouldn't be that guy, right? With that in mind, Wanli-gu Yoli suddenly stepped forward with a face full of anger. He directly rushed in front of Noah and shouted loudly, "Mr. Noah, what the hell are you doing?" Huh? Noah was shocked. Noah was not the only one who was shocked. Even Kei-na and Kaneji Winterhorse were shocked. Wanli-gu did not notice at all and continued to shout angrily. "Do you know what you've done? Do you know how much trouble you've brought to the people around you?" Noah was a little confused. "What have I done?" "You've done something that doesn't fit your status at all." Wanli-gu approached Noah with an extremely strong aura. "You're a king. Since you're a king, you should think more about the people around you. I realize that you don't realize how much influence you have." Unfortunately, I am no longer that impulsive age. The task of saving the little girl will be handed over to you young men. Susanoo looked at Noah with a profound look. "Isn't that the reason why you were pulled here by me willingly? Then it's easy to say." Noah raised his eyes and looked at Susanoo's eyes, then said lightly, "Where is the Wanli Valley and the Qingqiu courtyard now? Don't tell me you don't know?" However, the one who answered this question was not Susanoo, but another voice. "The foreign god Killer King. The girls you are looking for are now here." This was a very clear and beautiful voice. Accompanied by such a voice, a figure suddenly appeared without any warning on the side of the stove where Noah and Susanoo were sitting opposite each other. It was an extremely beautiful woman. The clothes she was wearing seemed to be a noble princess costume during the Heian period, with bright colors, known as the 12-style kimono. Her pupils were a clear glass color, and she had long brown hair that reached her waist. Her skin was smooth and delicate like ivory. The woman had a beautiful face that seemed to be carefully carved. Her beauty was far superior to that of modern humans, giving people the feeling that she was a princess that only appeared in ancient times. Such a beautiful woman took out 3 pieces of red tomo from her long sleeve and held it in front of Noah. The hidden world is a world where the difference between reality and illusion is very ambiguous. But it is also a world where the mind is superior to the body. As long as you want to, you can instantly teleport, and as long as you want to, you can change the world. This kind of unrealistic world is very difficult for human beings to adapt to, and if you don't do anything about it, you may not even be able to keep your life. Therefore, I turn the people who came with you into dead objects to prevent this side effect. I hope you can understand. Hearing this, Noah felt relieved that a beautiful woman like a princess suddenly appeared without him noticing, but he reached out his hand and silently took the 3 tomo. At this time, another hoarse voice sounded. I didn't expect that one of the most powerful god killers would jump into the hidden world for a few humans. As soon as he finished speaking, another person silently appeared in the small house and sat on the last empty seat around the stove. This was a monk wearing black monk robes. His skin was very dry, as if he had no real flesh, like a mummy. Okay, everyone is here. Susanoo put the wine bottle in his hand on the ground, looked at Noah and smiled ferociously. Then, let's begin the negotiations. God Killer. Chapter 14:10. Negotiate. Susanoo's words made Noah look around. He glanced at Susanoo, the princess, and the monk, and finally fixed his eyes on Susanoo. I think that what should be said to you clearly. What's the point of negotiating? Noah's words made Tyrant's mouth twitch. Tyrant's words were like thorns in his voice. You talk big. Should I say that you're worthy of being a god slayer? That's enough. Sir and master, we're here to talk to the king. You're being rude. It's against the rules of the conversation. The princess frowned slightly. Please be a little more careful. It's not good for us to become enemies with the king of a foreign country. Unfortunately, both Susanoo and Tyrant ignored the princess's words. One of them continued to drink, while the other shook his head, looking like a rebel. It had to be said that seeing these two people, no one would have any good impression of them. However, perhaps the two of them had such an attitude because of their self-confidence. Susanoo was a mythical god. Even if he was no longer a god of disobedience, he still had great divine power. It was estimated that in terms of strength, he was not inferior to the highest-level gods like Welslana and Mercado. As for the monk's words, Noah could clearly sense that he was not a god. However, this was a world where transcendental beings who were neither human nor god gathered. The monk in front of him was obviously not a human either. Coupled with the monk's dress, Noah felt that the monk should be a transcendent being who had cultivated his body to become a Buddha. Even if he was inferior to the god and the godslayer, he was still a figure that humans could not reach. As for the beautiful princess, Noah almost saw through her identity at first glance. God Ancestor. She was a fallen goddess of earth. Although she was no longer a god, she was still an existence that transcended human beings. Noah, who had confronted the god ancestor Genivia, sensed a trace of the same aura from the princess. Therefore, the princess was very likely to be a god ancestor who had existed even longer than Genivia. A god. A Buddha. A god ancestor. 3 transcendental beings. Except for the princess, who was a god ancestor, Susanoo and the monk were so rude because of their confidence. However, when it came to confidence, Noah was not lacking in it. It was because Noah knew exactly how much power he had at the moment. When using 2 avatars, Noah's full strength could reach 3 digits of box tings. The gods and godslayers in this world were between 4 and 5 digits. The highest was only 4 digits. Susanoo, the monk, and the god ancestor, the strongest one should be Susanoo, who had wreaked havoc in the world as the god of disobedience for more than 1,000 years. However, Susanoo's strength was probably at the middle of the 4-digit range, not the top, let alone the 3-digit range. For Noah, Susanoo was not a threat. Of course, Noah's authority was still in the process of adapting and could not be used casually. Even so, with Noah's current power, he could reach 4 digits. Coupled with the Sun's sovereign and many precious artifacts, his combat power was definitely not inferior to Susanoo. If he really fought with Susanoo, Noah was absolutely confident that he could win. As for the reason why, it was simply because Noah had a trump card that could restrain the gods. Clang! With a crisp sound of collision, a long spear suddenly appeared in Noah's hand without any warning. Noah stabbed the spear into the ground. Susanoo, the monk, and the princess were shocked. They all looked at the source of the sound. Then their pupils suddenly shrank, and their faces became dignified. Buzz! In the slight trembling sound, the red spear with a forked tip emitted an ancient and sacred aura, filling the whole space. Putting the monk and the princess aside, Susanoo could clearly feel it. The aura emitted from the strangely shaped spear made the heart of the famous hero god in Japanese mythology surge with unprecedented warning signs. Susanoo had never felt such a sense of danger for thousands of years. The keen intuition of a god told Susanoo. The spear was dangerous. Very dangerous. Buzz 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 buzz. At the same time, the kusanagi that was stabbed into the ground next to Susanoo began to tremble violently. The incantation power that surrounded it became chaotic and violent. It was similar to Susanoo. As Susanoo's god follower, the kusanagi also felt a threat that it had never felt before from the strangely shaped spear. That kind of threat was like an innate instinct that was being suppressed. It was extremely strong. Don't you have something interesting? Susanoo's playful expression gradually disappeared as he looked straight at Noah. Is that a type of god relic? It's not an exaggeration to say that in this world. However, it's different from your broken sword. Mine is the real deal. Noah met Susanoo's gaze and smirked. I just want to say that there's a limit to my patience. You can challenge me if you want. If you want to fight, I'll take you on any time. However, if you've asked me to come here just to see you guys put on airs. After saying this, Noah suddenly reached out his hand and grabbed the monk's collar. He pulled the monk in front of him and stared coldly at the monk's shriveled face that was like a mummy's. Let's fight then. I don't have time to waste on people like you who like to play games. You. The monk's shriveled face was contorted in anger. Susanoo's face turned grim as well. He was no longer as carefree as he was just now. At this moment, Susanoo and the monk finally realized what was going on. The person in front of them seemed rational, but it did not mean that he was not impulsive. He had killed 2 of the highest level gods when he first appeared. He had defeated 3 of his kind as soon as he became a god slayer. The sharp pitch-black divine sword directly pierced Noah's heart, and it actually caused a crisp sound of steel hitting steel, and even sparks of friction. This incredible scene finally made Susanoo's wild laughter stop on his rock-like face. It was just a moment. Whoosh! He saw. Noah turned around and kicked a powerful kick in the direction of Susanoo. Bang! Susanoo, who did not have time to react, was directly kicked in the chest with a powerful force, and with a muffled sound, his whole body was kicked out. Whoosh! The terrifying strange force acted on Susanoo's body, and his whole body turned into a cannonball, and with a sharp sound of breaking the air, he finally hit the rock wall of a cliff, and directly smashed the cliff wall, and pieces of rocks fell to the ground. Bang 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 bang. Pieces of rocks smashed into the ground, causing a series of heavy muffled sounds to resound. Susanoo was directly buried by the rocks, and in an instant, his figure disappeared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! In the next moment, a storm rose from the center of the pile of rocks, and directly lifted the huge rocks. In the center of the storm, Susanoo slowly stood up, raised his head, and shot straight in the direction of Noah like an arrow. You're quite capable, boy. A trace of blood flowed down from the corner of Susanoo's mouth. Can you have an invulnerable body? Is that your power? Susanoo narrowed his eyes. Invulnerability is usually a power possessed by the god of steel. Could it be that you've killed a steel somewhere? You talk a lot of nonsense. Don't tell me you expect the opponent to tell you his ability in a duel. Noah said so, and the corner of his mouth slowly rose. Compared to this, shouldn't you be more concerned about that broken sword of yours? If you don't pay attention to it, it will break. Hearing this, Susanoo's face changed, and he suddenly turned his head and looked at the Tian Songyun in his hand, and then his face changed again, because on the body of the famous divine sword, there were cracks all over it, and the Tian Songyun looked like a glass that was about to break, and it was too horrible to look at. You also said that my skill is not good. In that case, why should I use this spear? Noah raised the holy spear in his hand and pointed it at Sisanu from afar, which was emitting a sacred and ancient aura. That is because this spear exists to bury gods like you. Chapter 14:13. It was the spear of Longinus. It was a god-killing holy spear that only worked on individuals with divinity. The higher the divinity of the opponent, the more damage it could inflict. Someone like Sisanu, who was directly created by the father god in Japanese mythology, would have a high divinity. As long as he was stabbed by the spear, there was almost no chance of him surviving. However, although the holy spear was powerful, it would only work if it could hit its target. If it could not hit its target, it would be useless. Therefore, in the past, when Noah used this holy spear, he would first use the Enkidu to bind the opponent, then use the Longinus to attack. However, Noah did not use the Enkidu at the beginning of the battle with Sisanu. This was because Sisanu had Tian Songyun in his hand. Not only was the divine sword a god relic, but it was also Sisanu's subordinate god. It was similar to a demigod with divinity. Therefore, even if Lin Huang did not use the Enkidu to bind it, he would still be able to inflict damage on the divine sword if he used the spear of Longinus. However, Tian Songyun was only a subordinate god. Its divinity was not as high as Sisanu's. It was only comparable to a demigod. If its divinity was lower, the damage that the spear of Longinus could inflict would be weaker. However, no matter how weak it was, the damage that was accumulated from the countless collisions would almost reach the critical point of the divine sword. So, Noah waved the holy spear in his hand and stared at Sisanu, who had a change of expression. "It's my turn to attack now." Noah raised his empty hand as soon as he finished speaking. Buzz! Suddenly, golden ripples appeared in the air around Noah. Golden light flowed on the surface of the ripples. There were wedges of different shapes at the front of the chains. The crisp sound of the chains could be heard as they shot towards Sisanu. Sisanu finally couldn't keep his calm anymore. This was because the chains that shot towards him were as threatening as the strange spear in Noah's hand. It would be bad if he was caught by the chains. Sisanu's heart was filled with a strong sense of alarm. Immediately, Sisanu's body was surrounded by a strong gust of wind. He lifted his strong body and flew up into the air. Amidst the crisp sound of chains clanging against each other, the chains suddenly turned around and rushed towards Sisanu, who was flying in the air. Sisanu was speechless. He immediately controlled the wind and turned it into a hurricane. It was like a tornado that swept across the sky and retreated at an extremely fast speed. However, the rain of chains didn't give up and continued to chase after Sisanu. It was as if the rain of chains was following closely behind Sisanu. Therefore, in the stormy weather, the tornado and the chains that were glowing with a dazzling golden light began a chase under the dark clouds. Moreover, both of them were moving at an extremely fast speed. Looking at this scene, even the princess and the monk's expressions began to turn anxious. Those chains! The tyrant stared at the chains that were chasing after the tornado. Is that a type of god relic too? I think so. Ordinary weapons can't threaten a god. However, you can't ignore the weapon that the Devil King is using. The princess was in disbelief as well. What exactly did the Devil King use to be able to use those god relics so easily? Just as the name implied, god relics referred to all the weapons, tools that God used. Almost every god relic had a unique power that contained wisdom that humans could not replicate. It was a true god's weapon. Usually, only gods could use god relics. Apart from gods, it was impossible for humans to use god relics unless they could find a complicated way to use them. Take Hui Na, for example. The reason why she could use the Kusanagi cloud was that she could borrow a god's power. Hui Na could only use the Kusanagi cloud after obtaining the god relic's approval, by possessing Sisanu's divine power. Humans would not be able to use god relics if they did not use such a roundabout method. However, Noah could use god relics without any hindrance. Could that be the power of an authority too? The princess and the tyrant had the same thought. After all, apart from Erica and Liliana, the rest had no idea what kind of authority Noah had obtained exactly. Even Erica and Liliana only knew half of it. They did not know Noah's authority completely. Therefore, Noah's authority was still a mystery to the rest. Only Alice and Tony had more or less grasped some information. However, even these people had no idea what it was. Noah had tens of thousands of relics that were on par with God relics. Seeing that the Enkidu was unable to catch up to the tornado that was known for its speed, Noah's brows furrowed slightly before he relaxed. Then let's try this. A gigantic golden ripple spread next to Noah as soon as he was done speaking. A gigantic crossbow appeared from the ripple as if it was pushing something. The expanding mana was sucked into the crossbow, causing the arrows on the crossbow to flash with a star-like brilliance. Go after it. Kill 100 of them, 9 lives. When the real name of the relic was released, the arrow that was shining like starlight vibrated. The starlight on it grew, turning the arrow into a beam of light. The next moment the beam of light shot out like a shooting star. It twisted in the middle and suddenly split into 9 beams of light that looked like a dragon, shooting into the sky. Susanu, who was dodging the attack, was shocked. He turned his head and looked in a certain direction. 9 laser beams pierced through the space and flew towards Susanu at a much faster speed than the golden chains. They circled around each other and shot towards Susanu at a much faster speed. Susanu's eyes widened. Noah stretched out his hand, tightly grasped the hilt of the strange-shaped sword, and suddenly pulled it out. So, even if this sword can cut the world, it can only cut the space, it won't hurt the world itself, right? Noah raised the strange-shaped sword high above his head. Then wake up. Because of your power. Unless it's a last resort, I won't use you. It's rare to have such a stage. Cherish it. Show me all of your power. The treasure artifact named Obedient Parting Sword, suddenly trembled. Wong! In the trembling sound, the 3 blades that made up the sword suddenly rotated and set off a red wind pressure. The red wind pressure became more and more intense, and finally, it turned into a red storm and also swept down from the sky, sweeping the earth. Suddenly, 1 red and 1 gray tornado directly reflected between heaven and earth, stirring up the dark clouds, cutting open the fragile earth, and letting the earth-shattering wind wreak havoc in the entire space. The princess and the monk had already retreated, and even retreated to the edge of this space. Looking at the 2 storms that ran between heaven and earth, their faces were full of shock. So you're also the controller of the storm. God Slayer. Susanu laughed wildly. Very good. Very good. Is your wind stronger? Or is my wind stronger? Let's have a competition. After saying that, Susanu raised his hands high and heavily waved them down. Whoosh! The raging gray storm turned into an impact, and as if it was trying to break through the sky, it carried a crazy whistling sound and violently shot towards Noah's direction. Seeing this, the corner of Noah's mouth lifted, and a flash of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. The star of heaven and earth's origin, Enuma Elish. The obedient parting sword, which was spinning at an extreme speed, was fiercely stabbed out by Noah. Wong! The red wind pressure condensed into a monstrous red storm, and along the way it cut open space and cut open heaven and earth, and brought along a pitch-black spatial fault to meet the oncoming gray storm. Dong! As if shaking heaven and earth, the roar resounded in every corner. Chapter 14:15. Boom! In the storm, the red storm and the gray storm suddenly collided, causing an earth-shattering roar, setting off an extremely terrifying impact. The red wind pressure and the gray wind pressure turned into countless chaotic airflows, crazily flowing in all directions. Bang 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 bang. Everything that was swept by the wind pressure, no matter if it was trees, rocks, cliffs, or the ground, exploded, turning into fragments that were directly swept into the wind pressure and annihilated into powder. Kacha kacha kacha. In midair, the space was like a fragile piece of glass. Under the raging red wind pressure, it cracked and shattered. Wong! Just like that, the pitch-black spatial fault suddenly appeared wherever the red storm passed. It trembled repeatedly and devoured everything that was swept into it, annihilating everything into nothingness, including the gray storm. Almost at the moment of collision, the gray storm was suddenly entangled by the red storm, and was suddenly pulled into the spatial fault by the red storm, disappearing into the pitch-black spatial crack. What? Susanu's face was filled with horror. Noya, who was holding the 3 blades in his hand, continuously spun and released a red wind pressure. He looked at Susanu's horrified expression and sneered. The controller of the storm? That's not right. The real ability of the noble phantasm was not to control the storm. Instead, it was to form a spatial fault, and then split the world, reproducing the scene of hell before the birth of heaven and earth. So, it should be the creator of hell. After saying that, Noah was like a raging torrent of magical power, pouring it into the noble phantasm. Boom! An even more violent red wind pressure suddenly expanded from the point where the three blades of the sword of guile parting were connected. The wind pressure expanded and turned into a storm that pierced through space. While it tore through the space barrier, it carried along a dark space fault and swept violently towards Susanu's direction. The pitch-black spatial fault that seemed to have divided the whole sky into two suddenly became like a pitch-black galaxy, crossing the sky and falling on the huge gray storm. The gray storm was directly crushed by the pitch-black spatial fault, turning into a turbulent flow, and was pulled into the spatial fault, disappearing without a trace. Then the red wind pressure gathered into an even more terrifying storm, and like a red tornado breaking through the sky, it violently shot in the direction of Susanu. At this moment in Susanu's heart, a fatal sense of crisis exploded. The shadow of death suddenly shrouded Susanu's heart. His pupils shrank to the size of a needle tip. His resolute face was filled with horror and despair. After exhausting all of his divine power, Susanu could only watch helplessly as the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the sky and the earth into two halves, as if creating a road leading to the underworld, rushed towards him. In his heart there was even a touch of despair. In such a situation, the red wind pressure still tore the space apart like glass, causing the space fragments to splatter in all directions. On one hand, the red wind pressure divided the sky and the earth into two halves, and on the other hand, the spatial fault that symbolizes the underworld was approaching in the direction of Susanu. It didn't take long for the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth into two halves to arrive in front of Susanu. Susanu, who has exhausted all of his divine power, could only stare blankly at the spatial fault that filled his entire field of vision, and his whole body was frozen in place, unable to move at all. Just when Susanu was about to be engulfed by the red wind and annihilated by the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth, two figures suddenly appeared on both sides of Susanu, grabbed Susanu, and then disappeared in place. In the next second, the red wind pressure swept past the spot where Susanu had been standing. The pitch-black spatial fault also sliced this part of the world in half, and it didn't slow down in the slightest as it flashed past like the Milky Way until it reached the end of the world. Wherever the pitch-black spatial fault passed, the surrounding space would crack open, making the entire sky look like a spider web, filled with cracks. After an unknown amount of time had passed, the red wind pressure that had ripped open the space and created a spatial fault gradually dissipated and slowly disappeared. What was left was the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the entire sky into two halves, spanning across the two ends of the sky, and it didn't calm down for a long time. As for the ground under the raging wind pressure, it has long been turned into ruins. The original mountain forest and stream had long been completely shattered and disappeared without a trace. Wang! The three spinning blades that were spinning at an extremely fast speed slowly stopped, and the red wind pressure completely disappeared. Noah slowly pulled back the Guili sword that he had thrust out. Looking at the huge pitch-black spatial rift that stretched across the entire horizon and split the entire sky into two, there was no joy on his face. After being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, Noah's strength has been raised to another level. Using such a terrifying amount of magic to release the power of the good separation sword, to cut open the entire world and achieve the true creation of the heavens and earth, that would not be strange at all. Of course, there is also the reason why this space is only a part of secluded world, and it is not as big as a real world. However, after being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, using the power of the sword to release the power of the sword, it is not strange that it can directly cut an island in half. Then there is only one question left. In the end, did we still let him escape like this? After saying this, Noah turned around and looked at the corner of the ground that has been turned into ruins. There, three figures suddenly appeared without any warning. Susanu's knees went soft and he knelt on the ground, his face full of fear as he violently gasped for breath. Beside him, the princess and the monk's faces were also pale, and their eyes were filled with shock. Just now, if the princess and the monk did not use the special teleportation method of secluded world to save Susanoo in time, at this moment, Susanoo would have disappeared without a trace. Whether it was the dignified and polite princess, the rebellious monk, or the unscrupulous Susanoo, none of them expected this. To think that this battle would end so miserably, announcing their defeat. The highest level god in the hands of a single god-slayer was reduced to the point where he needed to be saved to survive. It has to be said that this is the most practical way to slap the face of the previous few people who said that it would be difficult to determine the victor. Just like this, under the gaze of the three people, Noah slowly floated down from the sky and landed on a broken rock. With the dark space fault as the background, he looked at Susanoo. What's wrong? Not fighting anymore? Susanoo's face became extremely ugly. The storm god, who is famous for his violent temperament, wants to continue to fight with Noah for 300 more rounds. However, when he glanced at the strange sword in Noah's hand, a trace of fear involuntarily appeared in Susanoo's eyes. To be able to make a god show fear in his eyes, this is simply an unprecedented feat. However, by relying on the most primitive ancient sword and the sun's sovereignty of the sun, Noah has achieved this feat. Not to mention Susanoo, even the rebellious tyrant was speechless. He had a bitter look on his face as if he had eaten Chinese gold thread. Only the princess, who was frightened by Noah's power, breathed a sigh of relief. At least Noah didn't blame them for saving Susanoo, right? Otherwise, Noah only needed to strike once more, and the three of them would probably not be able to survive. Just when the princess was about to step forward and say something, something strange happened. Boom! In the sky, in the deepest part of the dark space fault, a deafening loud noise resounded. Immediately afterward, a burst of laughter shook the air from inside. Ha 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 ha! I old son am free. Chapter 14:17. Although he didn't know why Great Sage equaling heaven suddenly appeared, according to the dialogue between Susanoo, the monk, and the princess, Noah still more or less guessed some reasons. For some reason, Great Sage equaling heaven seemed to be imprisoned in one of the spaces in secluded world by Susanoo, the monk, and the princess using some kind of curse. That space was the space where the princess used the curse to show that Great Sage equaling heaven escaped from the palace and was cut by the dark space fault. Due to Noah's use of the good parting sword, the space that Susanoo occupied was directly cut open by the noble phantasm that could cut open the world. At that time, the wind pressure of the sword of Guai Li just affected the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned. After all, secluded world was a multi-dimensional world composed of different spaces. The fact that people here could teleport through imagination proved that there was a connection between these isolated spaces. Therefore, Noah used the sword of Guai Li to cut open this space, which happened to open the way to the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned. As a result, the wind pressure of the sword of Guai Li also cut open the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned, and even cut off the curse that imprisoned Great Sage equaling heaven, allowing Great Sage equaling heaven to see the light again. Then Great Sage equaling heaven came to this space through the space fault caused by the sword of Guai Li from the space where he was imprisoned. In other words, although he didn't know the specific details, Noah seemed to have coincidentally released the god of disobedience that Susanoo, the monk, and the princess imprisoned with great difficulty, allowing the god named Great Sage equaling heaven to appear in this space. Yes, Great Sage equaling heaven was a god of disobedience. He was not a god like Susanoo who lived in seclusion and secluded world. Instead, it went against the myths and became a body that went against the Tao. It was a true god of disobedience who was dominated by arrogance. Ha 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 ha. Come on, Godslayer. Look at my staff. With a hearty laugh, Excellency Ape, who was as tall as the sky, stepped on the somersault cloud and rushed to Noah at an amazing speed. He waved his cudgel, which squeezed the air clean and brought a whistling wind. Feeling the violent wind pressure from the attack, Noah quickly raised the discerning sword in his hand. Clang! The sound of steel colliding with steel resounded. stirring up a powerful shockwave that spread in all directions. The terrifying force from Sun Wukong's steel rod smashed into the Guili sword, causing Noah's hand to go numb as he let out a groan. That terrifying strength came entirely from the great sage. Heavens equals shocking weight, causing Noah to involuntarily click his tongue.